Buckle up, everyone, because the US dollar may be headed towards something we haven't seen in our entire lifetimes, a collapse in global confidence. And no, this isn't fear mongering. This is about real world warning signs that are flashing red from Washington to Beijing to Johannesburg right now. Now, I spoke to Congressman Ron Paul for like 30 minutes the other day, and he said something that really stayed with me. He said, Clayton, I don't know how else to say this so that people will pay attention, but the US dollar is heading for collapse. He said, if you want to get an idea of what this is going to look like at Zimbabwe's currency.
That's the way it works in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela. It finally hits, and then there's runaway inflation. There's a collision, and then they have to do a new currency.
Yeah, he warned, by the way, all of us about the 2008 collapse, and no one listened to him. Few people did, but mostly no one. Cable news kind of like laughed at him. Then most Americans lost everything. And while most Americans are asleep at the wheel right now, the rest of the world is actively preparing for life after the dollar. So let's break it all down with all of the latest numbers, all of the data that Congressman Ron Paul and Thomas Massie are currently watching. So let's start with the basics. The United States is now sitting at over $34 trillion in debt with no end in sight. That's more than the entire GDP of the United States, and growing by the second, by the way. And even worse, the interest alone on that debt could hit $1.6 trillion per year by the end of the decade. That means just keeping the lights on in Washington, D.C. could cost more than the entire U.S. military budget. And if foreign nations stop buying our debt, game over. Which, as we'll see, is already happening. Now, if you couple that with the Fed's whiplash monetary policy, inflation hit a 40-year high in 2022, forcing the Federal Reserve into its most aggressive rate hikes in modern history. And the result? A short-term sugar high for the dollar's value, followed by multiple bank failures and then instability right here at home. And pain for countries that were relying on the US dollar debt abroad, like Japan. Even central banks around the world are reading the writing on the wall. They're dumping US dollars, US treasuries, and they're buying gold, more than 1,000 tons of it a year every year since 2022. That's not a hedge. That's a plan B. But the economy story is just one side of the coin. The real threat to the dollar is political dysfunction in Washington. Remember the debt ceiling crisis late last year? The one where we came within days of a default. Once again, it wasn't the first time. And it certainly won't be the last time. It was so bad that even Fitch Ratings downgraded the United States credit rating, saying the quiet part out loud that the U.S. is no longer seen as a fiscally responsible government. That should terrify every American who holds dollars in your savings account, or pays taxes, or relies on retirement savings. You're planning your retirement hoping that it's going to be there. And when our institutions lose global credibility, so does our currency. And now this is where things get really dangerous, the rise of the BRICS nations. Now, we've been using the dollar as a weapon, freezing foreign reserves, cutting countries off from the SWIFT banking system, threatening sanctions with the push of a button. And while that may feel like strength in the short term, it's actually backfiring in a big way, a huge way. I mean, just look at what happened after the United States and Europe froze $300 billion of Russia's central bank reserves. The rest of the world, especially the so-called global south, took notice. And if it can happen to Russia, it can happen to anyone, right? And the Biden administration set up a plan to basically funnel that stolen $300 billion and give it to Ukraine, the most corrupt government in Europe. Who would want to be part of that? Russia's saying, you're going to take my money and give it to Ukraine? Really? That's why the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are now taking serious steps to de-dollarize their economies. They're not just talking about it, they're doing it. China and Russia, 90% of their trade is now in yuan or rubles. India is buying oil from the UAE and Russia in rupees, not US dollars. Brazil struck a deal with China to trade in local currencies, bypassing the dollar completely. Even Saudi Arabia. This was a bombshell late last year. The heart of the petrodollar system, Saudi Arabia, now openly accepting other currencies for oil. That's huge. But because once energy starts being traded outside the dollar system, the demand for the dollar drops like a rock. I mean, it was called the petrodollar for a reason. But it's not just about trade. It's about building a parallel financial system. BRICS nations are rolling out their own versions of SWIFT. Russia has SPFS. China has CIPS. And they're even discussing a unified digital payment platform, a kind of BRICS bridge, if you will, that would completely bypass U.S. control. No more SWIFT, no more U.S. dollar. There's even talk of a new reserve currency backed by a basket of BRICS currencies and commodities, possibly gold. Now, while that's still in the early stages, the groundwork is being laid, and it's being laid quickly. It stalled out late last year. China hit a bit of a snag, but word among the banking elites is that it's back on. And we have that big BRICS summit coming up in Brazil.
The 17th BRICS summit is set to get underway in Brazil this week, bringing together leaders from some of the world's most influential emerging economies.
And let's not forget about the BRICS New Development Bank, headquartered in Shanghai. It's now lending in local currencies, not U.S. dollars. That's a direct challenge to the World Bank, to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, which is basically like one big cartel anyway. They've historically enforced dollar dominance. Oh, they'll make you pay. Like, hey, Ukraine, you want to borrow a lot of money from us? The IMF will gladly give you a loan, which you'll be indebted for the next 70 years. It is. It's like, it's like the mafia. So BRICS policymakers have long voiced concerns that the dollar-centric system imposes unfair costs on emerging economies. One issue is the spillover from the U.S. monetary policy. When the Federal Reserve hikes rates or the dollar gets a little stronger, it can actually cause capital flight and currency depreciation in emerging markets, forcing them to hike rates in turn to try to slow their growth. The South African central bank governor warned in 2023 that this dynamic could leave developing countries permanently more prone to instability. Another issue is that key commodities like oils, metals, foods are mostly priced in dollars. So when the dollar rises, those imports become costlier in local currency. That means much higher inflation in import-dependent countries. BRICS economies like Brazil, India, South Africa import large amounts of dollar-priced oil, making them very vulnerable. And additionally, many emerging nations have significant external debt in dollars. In 2022, about half of India's and China's external debt was dollar-denominated. So that means a stronger dollar raises the real burden of that debt. And BRICS leaders are on the record saying that dollar dominance is an inherent defect of the global financial system. It's defective. It's all they've known, though, for so many years, the bullies of the West. So if you're thinking, well, none of those currencies are strong enough to replace the dollar, you're absolutely right for now. But this isn't just about one currency replacing the dollar overnight. It's about the US dollar on its own collapsing. So you might be watching this saying, yeah, BRICS, they're not there yet. Yeah, maybe. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't need any help from BRICS. What we're doing to the US dollar is collapsing it all by ourselves. So screw Russia. BRICS is rising. Yes, they are. The dollar is declining. Yes, it is. But really, the collapse is all by ourselves right now. It's all about a slow, steady erosion, 1,000 paper cuts that weaken the dollar's grip on global finance. The biggest paper cut of all, as Ron Paul told me, is made by our own hand, printing money, borrowing more money to pay the interest on the massive debt that we already have.
If you print a lot of money, the value of the dollar goes down. So that's what it's being done mostly for the government to maintain it. So the dollar is still there, but the dollar, we're in a process of liquidating it. So in real terms, the dollar is worthless.
We don't need to thank China or Russia for that. We have ourselves to thank for this mess. So what does all of this mean for you and me? Well, if the dollar continues to lose its status as the world's reserve currency, here we go. The U.S. will have a much harder time borrowing any kind of money. Inflation will skyrocket, especially for imported goods. Your savings and investments priced in dollars, like if you got U.S. dollars in your bank account, it could lose purchasing power fast. I mean, that's why I'm always pushing you guys to invest in gold and silver. I mean, you guys do whatever you want. But I've been warning about this for a long time. I mean, the warning signs are here. The question is whether our leaders are paying attention. Because let's be clear, de-dollarization isn't a future risk anymore. It's happening right now. So that's the news update part of today's video. Now I want to tell you about today's sponsor, which is tied directly to what President Trump has been doing in the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. Now, I love what MAHA stands for and what RFK Jr. brings to this administration in his message and mission for America. It was really one of the big bright spots in this incoming Trump administration. One of the most exciting subjects for RFK Jr. is making healthcare more efficient and more affordable. And RFK Jr. is taking on big pharma in a big way, going after their television ads. Oh my gosh, they're going to be able to advertise on TV anymore. This is going to be amazing. I can't wait to watch it. And for example, another area that I personally struggle with is the time lapse when you're paying for a doctor visit, for a sore throat, taking a swab, seeing if it's like strep throat or something, sending it off to a lab, getting the results, coming back to the doctor for a second time at a medical center to get the prescription that could range between 24 and 48 hours. I mean, we just had to deal with this time lapse for my 12-year-old daughter. She had pneumonia a few years ago, and we were really worried that, she could get it again. She's prone to it. That we'd have to wait 24 hours, 48 hours to get a lab result. They told us 48 hours for a lab result. It's ridiculous. It's estimated that in the United States alone, there are tens of millions of sore throats annually. Imagine Africa or India with their massive populations of people where there's a severe lack of these types of healthcare infrastructures in the world's most densely populated areas. You're going to want to see what I call my #1 Africa play for the coming decade. You guys got to pay attention to this, okay? Today's sponsor of the video is Light AI. They're trading on the OTC. Here's the ticker on your screen, OHCFF. I'm showing it to you today because when it's trading right now, it's trading at all-time lows. Check this out. The company had already collaborated with Mr. Beast in Africa, philanthropically. It's a beautiful thing, look. And the idea is so simple. Billions of people own a device that is instantly linked to the internet, contains a camera, so the opportunity to turn it into a gateway for early detection of Strep A could be enormous in my view, and obviously in the view of the management team of the company. So think about the potential of an app that's easily downloaded, may allow your doctor to receive real-time feedback or imaging of concerning certain potential medical conditions that you might have. Right now, the technology that Light AI is focused on is Strep A specifically. Now, they own the patents, they own the app, they own the data. Again, it's a publicly traded company in the United States. So I know personally studies estimate that AI adoption could save between 5 and 10% of U.S. healthcare spending. Point of care diagnostics could cost a fraction of this by reducing lab tests that average between $50 and $100 each, and emergency visits between 500 and 2,000. And that's on the conservative side for an emergency room visit. One of the unintended consequences of the current way in which Strep A, for example, is treated is the default use of antibiotics before even getting lab results or not even asking the patient to get them. It's overprescribed. And I care about that. And I know that MAHA and the MAHA movement does as well. So you're waiting 48 hours and you have to wait for it. And you're like, should I just go get the antibiotics? Because it's going to get worse now in 48 hours. Maybe have to wait for this result. It's ridiculous. Earlier in 2025, accredited investors financed the IPO of Light AI with its patent-protected AI-driven health diagnostics technology, which has achieved a feat that, to my knowledge, no other company has been able to do. And this is significant in my view. Okay, this is the really significant part here because the IPO was at 55 cents Canadian, okay, the share price. And now the stock is trading at 32 cents Canadian, 23 cents US. That's down 52% since late February. The US symbol is trading at 23 cents. 23 cents. It's crazy. Literally, instead of the way that we do it today, think about it, taking a short video of the back of your throat, getting near instant Strep A diagnosis with 97% accuracy. It's amazing. Connected right to your doctor. It's a pocket doctor. Seriously, think of me right now, taking the phone in my hand, taking a short little video of the back of my throat, knowing the diagnosis. It's wild. And by 2025, smartphone penetration in sub-Saharan Africa is projected to reach approximately 60%, with around 500 million unique mobile subscribers. So this growth, fueled by affordable devices, expanding 4G and 5G networks, positions the continent as a key market for Light AI's AI-driven diagnostics. And best of all, the current market cap of the company is just over $30 million. That roughly matches what the company has raised over the years just to develop the patented technology. Look at this graph on your screen, because if you get this, then you'll understand the competitive advantage of this company. They had to work with these institutions, collecting a database of real swabs, okay, comparing them to the algorithm, and then perfecting its accuracy. This is a decade-long process. 60,000 images they have. Others tried this and could not achieve 97% accuracy for Strep A diagnosis. So it's time for you guys to do your own homework on this and due diligence on this company. Their website, their corporate presentation, several additional informational packets and sources are all in the description box below. So I implore you, go check it out. Do your research on this like I have. This was great sharing it with you, and we will see you next time, everyone.